Welcome back from the lunch break. I'm Cindy Jeffries from FMCS, and I'll be the facilitator this afternoon. So to kick us off, I'm going to turn it over to Greg and Herman to take us into the next steps.
Thank you, Cindy. I appreciate that. I hope everybody had a nice lunch. Before we begin this afternoon, I want to just clarify what our schedule is going to be. So we're going to start with accreditation this afternoon with Herman negotiating for the department there, and we also we'll have Donna Mangold in as our attorney for accreditation. She will be replacing Denise for the purposes of accreditation. So we'll have an accreditation discussion until 3 o'clock. At 3 o'clock, we hope to come back with. We're working on some data and numbers around thresholds for state auth. So we're going to come back later on this afternoon and have a discussion of where we are with that. So shortly then we'll be moving into the discussion of accreditation, but I want to make some remarks about where we are with accreditation. As we get there, I want to provide a broad overview of the work that we've done between sessions 2 and 3. And firstly, thank the committee for the thoughtful input we received. We received almost 60 pages of feedback to review, which almost everyone at the table had their name on at least one of those documents. So it was an awful lot of material. We've carefully reviewed and considered every suggestion we have received, and we've worked hard to incorporate feedback from all those suggestions in an effort at offering a proposal we think where everybody's contributions are reflected. So if you submitted something, you'll likely see some of your ideas or suggestions incorporated in what Herman will talk about this afternoon. The document is not exactly what the department would have put out on our own, but it is one that reflects the many different viewpoints that were voiced and hopefully gets toward our underlying goal. And we hope it is stronger because of that. I do want to caveat that we are going to walk through all of this. We're going to walk through each section one by one, but because we received the volume we received, we are unable to explain every suggestion that we did take. So we walk through the sections, which will be reflective of what we took, but we're not going to be able to address each individual proposal or suggestion that we got. We just don't have the time, but we will do our best to explain the reasoning for the changes we did make, and we're very appreciative to everyone on the committee who provided input to us. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Herman Ballance to begin the discussion on accreditation. Herman, whenever you're ready.
All right, and okay, thanks.
Sorry, thanks. Order. Sorry to interrupt. We said 2 hands up, and then we didn't recognize those hands. Were those Cindy?
Mm-hmm. Yep, I got him. I see one hand, and that is Jesse.
And then, of course, I can't find the unmute. I was just gonna ask for a quick caucus with Department of Ed and Consumer Protections and student groups before we go into any further language, just to kind of discuss some premises on the state auth before we move on to.
Okay. Do you have any idea how long that caucus will be?
About 15 minutes max.
Okay. All right. So can you list for us the names of the participants that you want in the breakout room?
Yes, if I can have Emmett, Carolyn, Maheen, and hold on one second because I wrote these down. Hold on. Maheen Robbins, Sophie, Diana Barmack, Ashlyn, Greg, Denise, and Dave.
And Greg from the department?
Yes.
Or Herman?
Yeah.
It's on state auth.
State auth. So we need David Musser, me. I don't know that we have Denise. Donna, is Denise available right now or not? To your knowledge or not?
Denise
She's on. She's there.
Oh, she's there. Okay, excellent. So it would be
right.
So it would be me. It would be me, Denise, Dave Musser, and I think that's it.
Okay.
Dave left the meeting, but if you want to ping him, I can read.
Yeah, we're gonna try and ping. I'll have Scott try to ping him and get him back. Get him to
Okay.
come back. He can come
Okay.
back to the meeting.
So Jesse, I'm gonna go ahead and we'll allow the caucus, even though it's not associated with the topic that we're discussing this afternoon. So we'll go ahead and do the 15 minutes and then we'll come back and pick up with accreditation. We do need to leave ample time for that, okay?
Correct.
All right, thank you.
Well, inquiry, Cindy, if that is the case, should we just wait to caucus tomorrow? Would the suggestion just to be to caucus tomorrow on state authorization since the topic is for tomorrow?
Tomorrow is going to be just as hectic as today, DC. So let's do it. Let them get their discussion had, and then the department can think about that overnight.
Did I miss anyone?
Okay, thank you. Welcome back. The caucus has returned to the main table. With that, I'd like to move it back over to Greg and Herman to finish talking about or start talking about accreditation.
So I'll turn it over to Herman. Whenever he's
All right. All right. Thanks, Greg. Good afternoon, everybody. We'll try to get through this as efficiently and as quickly, but as efficiently as we can. Also remind my colleague and wingman, Donna Mango. Donna, just jump in anytime you need to. And we can go to the red text document. I don't know who's driving Vanessa. Okay. All right. So we'll get started here. Just a reminder that the changes that we have made are indicated in yellow. We'll go through each section at one time, and then once we complete a section, then of course I'll open it up for some discussion. So yeah, if we go ahead and scan down, I think nothing significant on page 2. So we will then go to page 3. We'll go to page 3. And yeah, that's just the definition section. I just wanted to highlight there that we go to page 4. The only things that we added were some notes that definitions are in 34 CFR 600. That's credit hour, and distance education was moved there. Under B, added just the word additional that was there previously, so nothing there. So nothing else on page 4. And then we will now go to page 5. Again, we deleted distance there. Nothing additional other than I do want to, let's go back up to 5. I know this was there previously. I just want to reiterate here that we changed talked about the definition of institution. Before it had institution of higher education. That was before, so not relevant, but I just wanted to just remind folks of that one. All right, if we then go to page 6. Page 6 is where we start some changes that were different from what we had previously posted here. And this is under a representative of the public. Again, these changes were made, based on comments from different folks on the committee. Under 3, we added current, and then question. Jamie, we have a question. Was it on representative of the public or something previously?
Public.
Okay, I'll get through here, and then when I get through the definitions, then we'll come back to it if that's
Sure.
okay.
Okay.
Is that okay? All right. So we have current, and then we have contractor or consultant to the agency, or an employee or contractor or consultant to the agency. Those were changes added there. Nothing significant there other than the 5. And then if we go to page 7, there's just some strikes under substantial compliance. I hope everybody remembers we did add after the semicolon, or the agency needs to implement policies or standards to reflect compliant practice. I think that was there before, but I just know folks remembered that. And then we will continue down to, I think that might be ready. Yep. So that takes us through the definitions. And Jamie, I know you had your hand up, so please go ahead, and anyone else who has any comments in the definition section.
Thank you. There's no time for speeches today and tomorrow, so I'll just say that we accreditors take our responsibility very seriously within the triad, and we've shown that we're willing and able to make changes. So here's an area where there are some significant changes, some of which are acceptable or even valuable improvements, and we appreciate the changes the department has made. On one, we thought that we had agreement from the department that that the new prohibition on people with triad experience would only, that the prohibition from being public members would apply only to people who are currently employed within the triad and would not have a backward looking the 5-year provision. So we would propose deleting triad representatives from the number 4 from the language of section 5. The effect would be that you couldn't be counted as a public member if you were currently with a state or federal agency that was part of the triad, but you could if that was in the past. We, for example, have a former governor and a former chair of NSICI on our commission. We'd like to be able to keep them. Do you want to do it item by item? I've got one other.
Jamie, which section was that under? Because I'm reading 4 here. We scratched current or former under 4, and we just put a current employee of a member.
But then in number 5, it refers back to 4 and says, and applies the 5-year restriction. I think that may be an editing or technical. We pointed it out in our comments.
Okay.
If that's the department's intent, I think you can just find that little place where a 4 needs to be crossed out, so that it's not backward looking for triad people the way there is a 5-year window for others.
Yeah.
The other piece relates to, you ready to go on?
Yeah.
Okay. Is that the department's intent? I guess I should just clarify. We can work out the editing later, but are we in agreement that that's what Ed said was acceptable before? Seems like a wise.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. Donna, do you recall that one?
I think we need to we'll take it back for further discussion. Frankly, I don't remember where we landed.
Yeah, I don't remember either.
And right. And I think that was one where some of the other people who are proposing some of these additions had in fact agreed that that was a reasonable balance thing. Let me go to the other one. The other piece relates to exclusions based on the roles of siblings, spouses, step-grandchildren, and people I'm not sure folks can even locate. We are thinking about what we might lose in terms of capable potential public representatives who would be precluded by these tests. I can tell you that it is challenging, not impossible. We find excellent public representatives, but it is challenging to secure the time of qualified volunteers willing to work this hard on work this demanding. So we ask people to think about the cost, time, and energy it would take to do the vetting that this contemplates. 2 quick ways of looking at it. One is a cost benefit analysis. This is the first, but not the last time that I'm going to say that we well know that referring to burden for accreditors and institutions does not carry much weight in this discussion. It's easy to scoff at a thought about burden, but I appreciate that some of our fellow negotiators have thought about when is it worth it to ask people to do extra work and when is it a distraction from more important things that we could be doing. So let's be sure there's value to our requirements. So here's the picture. What if in vetting a public member, we miss a sibling's spouse's lecture fee, or the brother-in-law did a one-time gig installing cable at a college? A step-grandchild forgot that they got paid 3 years ago as an orientation counselor. We would be, Herman and his fine staff would, and you notice that, and it would be a deficiency by the agency. That is not where we should be putting our attention. Public members do have value, but we propose that the time period be eliminated for all of these family members we can accept current employment, that makes sense. If your brother is the provost of an accredited institution by us, you're not a public member, that's fair.
Jamie, you have
But
30 seconds.
This just overdoes it. So we would propose that we eliminate the 5-year exclusion for all these. We would also strongly propose an elimination of all of these extenuated family arrangements.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. Others on that particular section? Okay, Herman, back to you.
Okay.
Oh,
Just-
Jamie's
just-
got her hand. What? Jamie's got her hand up again.
Quick question on substantial compliance. I don't know how you want to handle it, but you just, if you want to speak to the public, I'll pause.
Yeah, no, I would just want to say that, you know, a couple, I think the definition of parent came from 600. I think that's where we got that from previously. Donna, you can correct me. And then I was just remind too that, you know, when the public members, you know, they have to attest, you know, that they meet these requirements. So there would be some thought pattern, you know, when they are appointed. So I just wanted to, you know, make that point too. It's not that the agency would be on its own to try to kind of remember these things. When that person is appointed, they would have to sign some sort of attestation that they kind of meet these requirements, which we think would probably be a little helpful in determining whether they meet this definition or not. Donna?
And they would need to do it at the point that we were trying to encourage them to take on this responsibility.
Right.
It's a kind of screen that people might just go, you know, I've got a big family and they've been active and I don't want to attest to something that I can't be sure of and we could lose them.
Donna, I think Herman asked if you had anything to add.
No, that's fine, Herman.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thanks. All right. And then I guess there was another question before we leave this section. There was a question on the definition of substantial compliance.
Simply wondering what the change of language, what the department's intent is in changing that language. What do you think will be different?
Let me get to where we are here. Hold on. Back down to substantial compliance. Again, most of the strike throughs were, you know, based on recommendations we got. Now that last part where we say, or the agency needs to implement policies or standards to reflect compliant practice, nothing in the definition previously said anything about having a compliant policy. So that's why we wanted to put that in the in the definition, because we're saying that the practice is compliant, but we didn't say anything about then amending the policy to reflect the compliant practice, which is the main thing. We want to make sure definitely that the policy is okay too.
I'm not seeing any more hands, Herman.
Okay. We will then go down to Vanessa. Let's see. We are to Federal Link. Right. And in Federal Link, again, I apologize for moving around. I have several notes open here. So under Federal Link, of course, we added the language in yellow. And again, most of the changes here were made based on comments from committee members in general. The one thing we did here, I think we got some written suggestions that said that the accrediting agency would have to have a program that at least that had participated in this Federal Link for 3 years. We expanded that because that that really doesn't work for us. Everything that we look at during the recognition process is on a 5-year window. So if we're reviewing a renewal application, we're looking at complaints that occurred during the current or the 5-year recognition period. So here, what we're saying is that if a programmatic accrediting agency has a program that had participated in its federal link at any point during the recognition period, which would be the current recognition period, we're saying now that would be an acceptable federal link. And I think that's what the changes to reflect. Under B, we added the word continue, and that is in a situation where an institution might be, not institution, an accrediting agency may be switching. An institution may be switching its accrediting agency. I'm sorry, institution may be switching an accrediting agency. So in that aspect, we would want the institution to continue its use of the federal link as it's switching to that new accreditor, and that would pretty much be for a Title IV purpose if it's an institutional accrediting agency. So those sum up the changes that we made based on comments under federal link. So again, if there are any questions there, be happy to talk about those. I see a hand from Laura.
Yep, Laura's up.
So I wanted to thank the department for its willingness to compromise here. I think this makes a lot more sense from our perspective. Just a quick question in A2 Romanet 2.
Okay.
To identify the institutions or programs it accredits that currently participate and rely, is that currently intentional, or does that also mean within the
Yes.
recognition period? So currently is intentional.
Right. It doesn't mean that. Yeah, it would be within that 5-year recognition period, and then and then also the ones that may be currently participating. Yes, it is intentional.
So it would be possible then for just let me understand. So
Okay.
identify institutions or programs it accredits that currently participate. How often does that have to happen? Is that just when the recognition happens, or is that like an annual thing?
Yeah, we're all talking about here during that renewal application. Yes.
Okay. All right. So then
I'm sorry.
That does make
I'm
sense.
sorry.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking.
Laura, I'm sorry.
I was thinking that's okay. No, I was thinking it was going to be an annual kind of reporting.
No.
Okay. All right. Yeah,
No.
that makes sense then. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands, Herman.
All right. We will move down to 602.11. I don't think there's anything in 11, so we'll go to 12. And basically, I won't read all this to you, but it looks like it's under B2 Romanet 3. And this is just language that we put in to basically ensure that the accrediting agency has the fiscal and administrative capacity to support the expansion of scope. And of course, it also said, and if it doesn't explain, why, explain, how the agency will make the necessary changes to support the expansion of scope.
Hey, Jamie?
Quick comments on 12. One is, was that just a word change, or did you think that that was a different threshold for showing that the agency would have that ability? And then I'll ask you the other one as well. There are two places where the department uses the word effective, and it's undefined and vague. It's in here in 12A2 and then in 602.14 again. And I've gotten the question about how people would, what the department intends that standard to be.
So I think we look under, I think we take those two a little, I think separately here, because here I think we're, if we're under 3, let's see where we're. And Jamie, where are you saying the effective under 12?
12A2.
Yeah. Yeah. So here, I think when we're talking about effective accrediting activities, I mean, that's going to have to be evaluated, you know, as effective, proficient, you know, does the agency do a thorough review of the institution's compliance with its standards? I think it's not definitive, but it would be a look at the totality of an accreditation review, you know, the self-study process, all of those things would help us to understand whether they've conducted effective accrediting activities.
I have a language suggestion that I think may capture what you're saying. The language would be, and I can provide it to the department afterward if you want, conducted accrediting activities consistent with its standards and policies. I think it just captures, I just offer it to the department as a clearer improvement that it does what it is expected to do as opposed to effective, which could have much wider meaning. That's it.
All right, any further questions about Romanet 3?
Not seeing any, Herman.
Okay, great. So then we will move on to 602.13, looks like. And nothing significant under 602.13 that wasn't already discussed. So now we can move to 602.14.
There, you've got 2 hands on 13.
Yep.
Okay, we have 2 hands up on 13.
I'll let you
Okay.
go first, just for a change of pace.
Okay, Barmack.
I think Jamie's trying to cancel me out, but that's fine. Couple of observations on 13. A renewal has been struck, I think partially because of Jamie's compelling argument, when the only expectation was the production of 3 letters from colleges, that it was sort of a meaningless requirement. But I feel like it should be inserted back in if we make additional meaningful changes to this provision, specifically on subpart A, letters of support from the agency from at least 3 accredited institutions, 3 educators, and if appropriate, 3 employers or practitioners. I think more, you know, anybody can find 3 employers of some kind, of some description and standing. But the piece of this that is perhaps a little more meaningful is 3 licensing authorities if the programs being offered if the scope of recognition includes oversight of academic programs that lead to licensure. That's been an area of enormous abuse where institutions essentially rely on institutional accreditation by institutional accreditors that may have zero capacity in reality to judge specialized offerings. And in fact, it's most egregious, frankly, when institutional accreditors accredit standalone, say, law schools or standalone professional programs that do have competent programmatic accreditors who in some cases have expelled them. So it seems to me like we want to reinsert that renewal or somehow insert it back where licensing authorities should also be asked to weigh in on initial or renewed recognition based on the activities of the accreditor.
Okay, thank you, Barmack. Jamie?
I think on this point, the department has made a good improvement not to require those letters. There are plenty of components of the re-recognition process for existing accreditors that allow the department and the public to rigorously explore all such questions. And I think Barmack's right that the letters you solicit are not likely to be as helpful as the in-depth interchange that takes place in the public comment and the inquiry by NASIKI and the department. I rose, as they say, only to make one small point about 602.13. I think it's in B, but the requirements for a change of scope, and it also takes place in the new accreditor application process, that would require on a change of scope to have an institution commit to something it would do many years into the future in an apparently irrevocable way just seems like bad policy. You can't ask any board to commit years out to a decision, in this case to use a particular accreditor, when the circumstances could be very different at the time the agency achieves recognition or the expansion of scope. And it would be irresponsible of a board to promise to do something at a time when the facts may be very different. So I would propose an alternative that says expect in good faith to rely, or any other language the department believes is a strong way to say that is your current intent. But I don't think they can compel a board to make a decision that distant from the real circumstances affecting it.
Okay, thanks, Jamie. There are no further hands, Herman, so
Okay.
You want to go on with 602.14?
Yeah, I think we'll go to 602.14. Okay, so in 602.14, we have again made some changes here based on comments, suggestions from the committee. Is there a hand up before I move on here?
Joe, is there a question on this section or something else?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay,
statement on the section.
Okay, can he
Okay,
finish
let me
his
get through.
overview? Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I'll get through it and then
I just
we'll,
wanted to get in line.
Understood.
Okay. So again, in this section, what we've made some changes here again, based on comments from the committee. And basically what we're saying here is that the majority of the members of the agency's decision-making body who decides the accreditation or pre-accreditation status of institutions or programs, establish the agency's accreditation policies, or both, are not executive officers or board members of the agency's accredited institutions or programs. So first, let me talk about that first long sentence there. When we say majority, we're talking about something that would be over 51% would be a majority. So you could have up to the 50% mark these types of executives on your decision-making body, policy-making body, if they're not, if they're not the same. The other thing we're looking at here too are what we say is what we think of as being non-academic executive officers. And I know someone's going to ask me, so who are we calling the executive officers? And again, we're looking at, presidents, chief executive officers, chief financial officers, vice presidents, those types of folks. But remember, if they can qualify as academic folks, then they don't count in your 50% in that 50% threshold that we have here. If I go down to 4, there are minor changes in 4 effective guidelines. And what we're looking here is just to strengthen the language around conflict of interest for decision makers. And I think that covers it for 602.14. Again, I'll ask my colleague Donna if you need to add anything to what I said. Please jump in, and then after that we can open it up for discussion.
Nothing more to add.
Okay, thanks, Donna.
Okay, thanks, Donna. So with that, we'll go to Joe.
Okay, thank you very much, Herman, for the explanation. I know that this would impact the Higher Learning Commission board significantly. We have 8 CEOs and 2 past CEOs on our board of 19. We also are a little confused as to why limiting executive level engagement and replacing it with the term academic it's not clear to me what your intention is there. If I have an academic appointment as an English professor, is that sufficient? I'm confused. The other is the intent here of this proposed rule. I'm very concerned that the department is going beyond the current public member legislation and telling accrediting bodies how they need to fill these board seats with their members. We deliberate, we analyze, we digest information on cases for institutions very seriously that come before our board. And we also have strong conflict of interest policies. I also want to share that HLC is moving toward risk managed accreditation in order to respect a stronger institutional focus, or respect the institutional focus of our stronger institutions, and take a look at what metrics we need to continue to consider to identify at risk. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate that. Jamie?
Accrediting agencies are defined elsewhere in these rules as voluntary non-federal peer review agencies. We exist to promote quality education and student success. And believe it or not, we go through a rigorous process of federal review voluntarily so that we can qualify institutions for Title IV eligibility if they want and help them improve. The department reviews our standards and application, the adequacy of our budgets and capacities. They observe site visits and commission decision meetings. We're puzzled about what this is trying to get at. If there's a question that commissions are under-resourcing agencies so they can't be effective, or that their decisions are not supported by facts, you'd think we'd hear about that through the SICI and senior department official process. But we haven't heard about weak standards or unsupported decisions. Those decisions are public, so there's another way to see what's going on. We have accreditor dashboards that we use to understand how institutions are doing. We asked the department for this definition, but because we're just getting it now, we haven't been able to be as precise as we would be about the effect. In some ways, thinking that executive officers' most logical definition was CEOs, rectors, chancellors, that would probably not have been a problem for any of the agencies. But saying whomever, is it the school, is it the agency that determines who is an executive officer? At Michigan State, there are 23 executive officers plus 20 deans. And maybe deans are academic in your definition, but student affairs, chief diversity officer, are those executive officers under that loose definition? It's very confusing But the main point is that we need the expertise of senior people who can look at the entire range of an institution's mission, program, finances, and sustainability, planning, and governance. And we need people who are used to making those connections. So provosts and presidents and chancellors could be very useful in that regard, but limiting the proportions of the other folks who bring that kind of expertise and letting voluntary agencies determine the balance that we want as long as we meet the standards is unduly restrictive. And I've heard both no reason why it would.
You have 30
matter
seconds remaining.
when we have so many other screens in place to tell whether we're doing a rigorous job.
Thank you, Jamie. Scott Dolan?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm plus one to Jamie's comments there across the board. You know, I will add, you know, the operations of an institution, while, you know, the core is academics, you know, there's a real need around expertise related to financial background and CFOs, given the challenges we're facing that many of you have brought up here, right? So to limit CFOs from being able to weigh in and share that important knowledge, I think is really short-sighted. What I don't yet understand clearly from this language is what problem we're trying to solve. And I think Jamie asked that question, others have asked that question. And I know there are a number of hands up and I know we have a short time, but I really think that question needs to be responded to and answered here, right? And again, I think I said this in February, but conflict of interest policies, a shared definition of what a fiduciary is and you know, what it means to be a fiduciary in different roles that you have. And we'll say, speaking as, I don't know if I qualify as an executive by this definition, but you know, it does call into question the integrity of you know, some of my colleagues again, which I think we, you know, that gets back to my question around why. So it would be helpful to hear a little bit more about the context and rationale for this introduction of language.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Doesn't appear as though the department has an answer right away. I know that you said Jamie may, but I'm not seeing anything from her either, Scott.
I think Jamie asked the question that I asked,
Okay.
maybe in a different
Yes.
in a different way.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll respond to some of that, but I think we have some other hands up, so.
Okay. All right. So you want to, let's move on with Laura Racer King.
Sorry, having mute button problems. Herman, I was wondering if you could talk about how the term executive officer would apply to, or how this would apply to a programmatic agency. I thought I heard a definition of executive officer meaning sort of presidents or C-suite kind of executives. You're not including in that definition somebody like a dean, who I would consider to be an academic administrator. All of them are, you know, also academics. They're teaching classes. They're, you know, can you just talk about a little bit about how that would apply to programmatic accreditors?
Yeah, sure. So the first thing I'll come back here, but I want to draw everybody's attention to 602.14A3 and 4. And those two, this will definitely answer your question, Laura. So you can have on your decision-making bodies, especially if you're a programmatic accreditor, you're required to have educators and practitioners. And in the case of a programmatic accreditor, you know, a dean could definitely qualify as an educator. Some people would argue the dean could also qualify as an administrative personnel. Mm-hmm. So for programmatic accreditors, you probably wouldn't get into a position, you know, unless you had a president of an institution somewhere who was on your commission or your board or whatever the decision-making body name is. The other thing I wanted to bring up is, you can have up to 50% of your board or commission, including those folks. There's no limitation on if these members are from other than your institutional membership. So if these folks are, there's no count if they're outside of your membership. So there's no issue with vice presidents or, these financial officers or any folks like that are outside of your membership. The other reason I wanted to draw folks back to 60215, especially A3, if you're an institutional accrediting agency, to answer some of the questions, we do require that your decision-making bodies have academics and administrators on your site visit teams at minimum. So some of those members of your boards are going to be administrators, and they may very well qualify, even under the requirements that we have here. So we're definitely not excluding anybody with financial experience. We think they're needed, and they would probably fit into that category of being an administrator. So,
okay,
Laura, I hope that answered your question.
That's really helpful. And then just really quick, I wonder if it would be advantageous to actually put a definition to executive officer in the definition section. Perhaps that is where it would go, but I think having that definition would be helpful.
Okay. And we'll definitely talk about that. Again, Donna, if you have anything to add, please jump in. But I was trying to make sure I explained that the composition of site teams include both, for institutional agencies, include both academics and administrators at minimum.
Okay. Thank you. Barmack, you're next.
Yeah, a whole series of questions have been raised. I'll do my best to respond to them. One observation I'd like to make right off the bat is that we constantly hear about accreditation addressing academic quality. We have a kind of a body-soul problem here. People confuse the physicality of the institution, the quad, the administration building, the laboratories, the physical campus is not the product. The product is the instruction and the learning and the teaching and the research, the ephemeral stuff. And those ephemeral stuff are the product of the institution. And we are constantly told that's what accreditors are about, right? Now, going back again to the late 19th century roots of accreditation, the idea, I think at that time, was that this was the domain of the faculty. We hire administrators to take care of the body, pay the bills, make sure the lawn is manicured, et cetera, but we hire faculty. And by faculty, I don't mean somebody having an incidental appointment, but somebody whose full-time job is on the faculty. They're not part of the physicality, maintaining the physicality of the campus, that those folks are in charge of academic policy. Guess who's missing from this reg, folks? The faculty. What has happened is that the officials who do a great job maintaining the physicality of the campus have elbowed their way onto discussions and determinations and judgments about the product, which is that ephemeral thing that the faculty used to be in charge of. So that's the rationale for saying there is a difference between having administrators represent institutions and having faculty make judgments about academic programs. It's a meaningful distinction because obviously pressures of paying the bills can induce practices that generally gravitate towards more lenient judgments when it comes to what constitutes the product. And I think we're attempting to improve on the accreditation process. People keep saying, what's the problem? The problem is Corinthian. The problem is ITT. The problem is that while everybody at this table is beyond reproach. I want to emphasize that there are some bad actors out there enjoying the full benefits of accreditation because they call the shots. You have conflicts of interest. The whole thing is a conflict of interest. We're attempting to change that. Accreditation is voluntary.
You have 30
absolutely.
seconds remaining.
Yes, but it should be subject to certain federal rules per the statutory language if it wants to be recognized by the secretary. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Barmack. Appreciate your comments. Carolyn?
Yes, I wanted to express support for this provision and say that actually it seems like while it's a reasonable compromise, it may not go far enough because it's although I understand the argument that you want people with knowledge, this provision provides for up to half of the decision-making body to be people who potentially have an interest in not having the strongest standards possible applied. So I think this is a reasonable compromise, although I would have liked to have seen it go further in terms of making sure that decision-making people are not actually people who have a interest or a fiduciary duty based on their position with a regulated, accredited institution.
Thank you, Carolyn. Jamie?
Hardly know where to begin in 3 minutes. There is such a difference of opinion. Let me start here. I wouldn't have used the word product. The purpose of institutions is student achievement, which involves learning, which is grounded centrally in the learning, as well as, but less critical right here, the civic role of the institution, the research component, preservation of our culture, so forth. It takes many things to secure the kind of student achievement that we're talking about, and that we will be talking about in a few minutes. Those resources and capacity include things like student affairs, but I think on this basis we might be arm wrestling about whether the vice president for student affairs was an administrator, was an executive officer, or an academic. It requires institutional research. In our view, it requires people who can help evaluate whether the learning is effective. The people who provide the technology that faculty use to incorporate in their classes and to be effective. And yes, it includes people who understand when an institution is healthy enough that it can predict, that we can predict as accreditors that it can go into the future on a stable enough basis to continue to deliver that education such that it is safe for us to say this is an institution that we can accredit because it is a forward-looking responsibility. So yes, faculty is absolutely central. We have not seen faculty vote differently than other members of our commissions. That's not what's going on here. This is a peer review process. And to the extent that a peer review process does reflect the people who are involved in the activity know well how to review it, understand it, and validate it when appropriate. But because of the potential that is inherent in a peer review process, we have checks and balances, including department review and very strict conflicts rules. I can hear you say already on a micro level, there are conflicts that I can't vote on a school that I attended or that I ever worked at or that I have a family connection working at. I understand
30
this is
seconds remaining.
What the interest is. We need all those people. Could we manage within these numbers? Probably. We have fine people who want to serve on these commissions, but it is not reasonable to constrain our authority over 10-year-old examples of accreditation problems.
Thank you, Jamie. All right, any other
I'll add, are we perfect today? We are doing the job of accreditors as effectively as possible. We're happy to make improvements, but this will not improve the rigor of accreditation.
Thanks, Jamie. Okay, Herman, back to you. There's no further hands.
Okay, I think at this point we'll move on.
Could I just ask, in light of the fact that we just got the definition today, while we were in discussions, may I, if we wanted to return with a comment, or I don't know that there's language that would improve it, but Laura's suggestion that we actually get something that would tell us what the answer is in writing, so that we know what the definition of an executive officer is. But I would ask that we be able to come back to it tomorrow, if necessary, given that we didn't have a definition to evaluate. And this is an unexpected one.
Okay, so to be, just so I understand, Jamie, your request is that since you just received the definition or explanation of what is encompassing executive officer terminology, you would like to be able to come back to discuss just that piece tomorrow?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And in that definition, is the department going to set the definition, or are they intending to leave the words as they have them and ask agencies to or the individual to tell you whether they are executive officers? Is it institution, it is the director of X or the dean of Y, an executive officer in one place and not in another, based on their own institutional definitions?
I'll leave that would be a decision up to the department. Yeah. So
yeah, that's a question for them.
Yeah. So Herman, I don't know if you can answer that question right now, or if you need to get back with us.
Yeah, I think we'll get back. I'll get back with you. Yeah, on that.
Okay. Jamie, once we hear back from the department, we'll make sure that we get that whatever information is ever shared with us via negotiators or the department, we share as quickly as possible for transparency reasons. Okay, Herman, back to you.
Okay, I think we covered 4 under that section. So I think we're ready to move to 602.15. Just some word splices there. So nothing too significant. And now we will move down to 602.16, and we'll start discussions on the changes that we made here for student achievement. And before I get started, in case I forget, I wanted to just point out here that the changes here that we made in student achievement, specifically related to identifying minimal expectations, we limited that just to student achievement. So I want to make sure that I get that out in case I forget that as I'm talking through some additional information from my notes. Under 1, we added the agency's accreditation standards must set forth clear and effective expectations for institutions or program it accredits in the following areas. And then we, let's see, Romanet I here talks about Romanet 1 here, basically old language. And then we just added as established by the institution and where feasible and appropriate, the agency standards for success with respect to student achievement must And then that's we have added identify minimal expectations of performance, which may include but are not limited to. Language from the old regulations, state licensing examinations, course completions, job placement rates. And then based on comments that we got from committee members, we added some new language here where we talk about if the agency determines that setting minimum expectations of performance is not feasible or appropriate for the institution or program that it credits, for any particular institution or program or group of institutions or programs, its standards should explain why such minimum expectations are not required and clearly describe the agency's method for assessing and enforcing its student achievement, its standards for success with respect to student achievement. So I'll stop there just for a second. Here is where we would, really expect agencies to review their student achievement standards. Number one, demonstrating, that they are sufficiently rigorous, how the agency determined that those standards are sufficiently rigorous, and then defining their standards, what those minimum expectations should be, whether they're qualitative, quantitative, a combination of both, whether there are several elements within an agency student achievement standards. But again, considering all of those things, we're saying that we would be requiring the agency to state in its standards what those minimum expectations would be. And again, we have the optional language, which in cases where it may not be appropriate for an institution or a specific set or types of institutions, then the agency would have to explain why setting those minimum expectations are not appropriate. So I will stop there. Well, let's go down and we can get it all at one time. Under B, we talk about here that standards should be reviewed periodically and updated. And then C, this is based on comments that we got from the committee members about, when you establish those standards, to consider disaggregated data, and it could be based on race, ethnicity, age, gender, socioeconomic status, first generation college students. There may be other categories too. So I will stop there. I think there's one more change at the bottom, but we'll get that. Well, I'll do that one too. If you can scan down to page 16. And then the last part we put in, again, based on comments that we got from the committee. They have to have some controls to ensure that student achievement data is not manipulated or inflated to make the performance seem better than what it is. So I will stop there, and I will open up what I know will be passionate discussion here in this area. So we will start there.
Okay, sounds good. And perhaps we'll take a quick break after this session and the passionate discussion for leg stretching. Laura, you're up first.
Thank you. So I feel like I'm the statute police, but I'm going to have to be, because I think it's important to level set here. In 20 USC 1099B, there are two things that speaks directly to this, right? So the first one is, notwithstanding any other provision of law, the secretary shall not promulgate any regulation with respect to standards of an accrediting agency or association described in subsection A5. So that's the more general prohibition on this kind of language. Then, related to student achievement, it says nothing in this section shall be construed to permit the secretary to establish any criteria that specifies, defines, or prescribes the standards that accrediting agencies or associations shall use to assess any institution's success with respect to student achievement. Specifies, defines, or prescribes. The secretary is prohibited from doing those things in statute. So my first comment is that I don't understand the statutory permission to do this is the first question that I have. And then secondarily, even if Romanet 1A maybe could get by, B and C definitely specify and define what an agency has to do with respect to student achievement. So can someone address the statutory language here and how this relates to that?
Laura, did you have, I know you said 1A you think might be okay, but then did you also call out B and C? Or just?
Yeah, definitely called out B and C. A provides a lot of wiggle room. Minimum expectations of performance is still specifying, but certainly B and C specifies very specifically what needs to be done.
So I will speak to B first, and then I know we have our legal counsel on the line. Donna's on, and she may have some things to add. And again, based on our legal guidance, we didn't think that we have overstepped here. But again, Donna's on, and she can definitely respond to that. So under B, when we talk about be developed and periodically reviewed and updated if necessary, you remember that under 60215, under 60221, we already require agencies to conduct a systematic review of standards. And under 60221, we put parameters of how that systematic review of standards should be done. So I don't think this is really asking any more of what we already asked the agency to do under that particular regulation. And then.
So why is that not sufficient? If it's already there, then why this language? Why is what is already there not sufficient?
Yeah, I think this is just for us, we wanted to put that in here too, just as a reminder, to the agencies under student achievement to conduct that periodic review and update as necessary. Again, this is just a reminder we wanted to put specifically into this portion of the regulation. But again, how to do this, again, is already covered under 60221. And then you also talked about C. And it's C, we're saying include considerations of. I mean, we're not saying that you have to use these categories. We're saying here that these categories may include. I think we think C is fine. But Donna, did you want to jump? Do you have any comments on this, on Laura's questions?
Carefully considered the statutory language before we went into the rulemaking. We also heard your comments last time in terms of what the statute says on these points. And we believe that we are consistent with the statutory guardrails. The other thing is, if you look at the introductory language to this provision, it says that these elements should be applied where feasible and appropriate, which allows another level of discretion to the agencies. So we believe that we are within the requirements of the statute.
Okay, thank you. Jill Blondin, you're up next.
Thank you. So I just have two comments and one question. Well, it's just kind of a mixture here. So two terms that concern me, and I think we brought this up last time, so I won't belabor it, but valid. How do we measure validity? Just a question. Enforce is a word that is kind of goes along with the last conversation that we had as well, that Laura brought up. I mean, just from a statutory, I mean, that's a little confusing to me. And then finally, I want to amplify the issue again around may include federal data, because that federal data shows that community college students are not meeting the outcomes set by traditional four-year institutions. That a student who starts with me and takes one biology class because she wants to transfer to Wright State University is a failure because she didn't graduate from Clark State College. So I have some concerns about what kind of data will be used and to make this more mission reflective. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it. Erica?
I just have a quick question from a consistency perspective. Can accrediting agencies have different standards for different types of institutions that they accredit?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Erica. Any other hands for this section? Jamie?
So much to say. Accreditors are working actively to incorporate outcomes. We are doing much of what's contemplated here. It's not resistance to data as a power tool for pushing student results. So in that sense, we're all moving and trying to move in the same direction. That momentum is taking place. NASICI is doing a lot to drive it by the way that they are asking questions about what accreditors do. So I think this may be a place where there's momentum and regulations may confuse or complicate some very positive activity that's taking place. The Department of Education's best contribution might be to improve the completeness and timeliness of data. I wonder if IPEDS would meet the valid and reliable test that's expected of us, and how would we accomplish that? One of the good things about accreditation is that we can use a variety of sources and decide what weight to give it and what sense to make of it. Excuse me. One of the things I'd like to come back to in a minute on the statutory point is that reading 602.16 alone is not the full picture. It has to be read with 602.20 enforcement, so we can talk about it when we get there as well. So let me stay with this provision and some of the things that we're wondering about it. Who decides what's feasible and appropriate? And I wonder there's a lot of language about it as established by the institution, and yet at the same time, there are expectations for what the accreditor will do. And finally, well, why don't I stay with that and not pile too many questions on Herman at once?
Okay.
Who is going to make those decisions? And then I'll come back to Erica's question. If you don't mind, let me just explain, Erica, the word standards here is used in a very odd and difficult way. Our standards, and I believe other agencies' standards, are standards that apply to all of our institutions. What we apply are different metrics or questions or inquiries or identification of what good practice is for a community college or for a specialized graduate program. The standards remain the same, but ever since this language started to be used, I believe it would be clearer if it was referring to measures of what it took to meet the standard,
You have 30 seconds
can
remaining.
be mission specific and can be adjusted for student population, disaggregated data, type of program, mission of the institution, and so forth. But the standards of quality and sustainability and ability to plan and appropriate governance, those do not differ. So it is a confusing use of language.
Thanks, Jamie. Herman, do you recall the question?
I think I got.
Feasible
I think
and
I got.
appropriate, valid and reliable.
Okay.
I got most of it.
Okay.
Yeah, let me start real quickly. So I heard even before that, Jim, I think I heard a couple of things. You know, the first question was about could there be different standards for different institutions? So for the first part of this whole discussion, I would refer folks back to the statutory language under A, which talks about success with respect to student achievement in relationship to the institution's mission, which may include different standards for different institutions or programs. So, you know, the student and our regulations say that same thing under Romanet 1 here, where it says success with respect to student achievement in relationship to the institution's mission, which may include different standards for different institutions as established by the institution. Now we have, where feasible, we start talking about what the accrediting agency can do. And then, of course, if you look under the limitations on scope of the criteria, which Laura was talking about earlier, there is the language there that says nothing in this act will prevent an accrediting agency from establishing any additional standards that it wants to establish. So that's where we're talking about here, where feasible and appropriate, the accrediting agency may have its own set of student achievement standards that they want the institution to comply with. So we have two things here. Number one, if the accrediting agency allows the institution to establish its own student achievement standards, then what we're looking to see is, okay, then accrediting agency, how do you determine that the student achievement standards established by the institution, number one, are sufficiently rigorous? So how do you determine that if you don't establish that for yourself? And that's what you all are currently doing to us now when you submit your petition for recognition, your application for recognition. You have to tell us, okay, we let the institution establish. This is how we determine whether that's sufficiently rigorous, you know, and effective. You tell us that. What we're saying now is we want those student achievement standards to identify minimum expectations of performance. Now, if you turn that over to your institution, we're saying that then those student achievement standards have to identify these minimum expectations of performance. If you don't establish those and the institution does, you then have to review those things and say, okay, we think this is a appropriate minimum level of performance. So what we have here is not, in that aspect, is not straying away from what the statute allows. It's either the institution establishes it, you determine if what they're doing is appropriate. And if you establish, then your standards have to include all those things. So I hope that in a nutshell kind of answered some of the stuff. Yeah, there are a lot of questions there, Jamie. So if I missed something, just fire back at me. We'll whittle through it.
Okay, thank you. I'm showing a couple more hands up on this section. Scott Dolan has come to the table for private nonprofit institutions in place of Erica Linden. And Scott, you are up.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it would be helpful to kind of pull up the statutory language just so that we're all on the same page about what that shows there, because I do get a little confused about the different uses of standards underneath this section, especially within one, right? And I think that was Jamie's question that I don't know if we fully addressed around the difference between the department promulgating specific standards and potentially suggesting metrics that we might use to determine the effectiveness of those standards. So, and again, I'm trying to pull up the statutory language myself, but given the fact that there are some questions and concerns, and I understand the department's perspective that they feel as though that they're within statute, I don't know if it's a shared perspective. So looking at those things side by side, main question is in I, success with respect to student achievement in relation to the institution's mission, which may include different standards for for different institutions or programs as established by the institution? Are we using standards in different ways here? And it becomes confusing to me. To Jamie's point, are we introducing more confusion to a process that's sort of moving in the right direction based on the work that we're doing through NSEKI?
If you ask me, I don't think so, because when you look at that underneath A, then it lists those areas when we're talking about standards that we're talking about. We're talking about correct, other than student achievement, standards for curriculum, faculty, facilities, fiscal and administrative capacity. We're just going down that list. When we say standards in general sense, we mean the agency's accreditation standards. What do they require for accreditation of an institution?
Okay. Thank you, Herman. Jillian?
Thanks. I have just one specific question and then general overarching comment. And sorry guys, I put my question in the chat, but then nobody gets to it. So I just end up getting in line anyway. So sorry. But my question specifically to the exchange between, I think Laura and Donna, and then Donna's response, which talked about how the department's view. So first of all, I have the same question. I'm not a lawyer, so I have the same questions on sort of statutory authority as other people do. So just would +1 that. But to the comment about the department believing that there is flexibility in the feasible and appropriate language, it'd be helpful to me to hear exactly how the department envisions that flexibility. And I think I put in the comment in my question in the chat, if an agency doesn't believe that this is statutorily appropriate, then do they not have to do it? I'm just really confused about that phrase in general.
That is not where we were going with that. That is not where we're going.
Okay, so can you be more specific about what you mean by that phrase? Because I think it's super vague and I don't exactly know how to understand it.
Whether the elements underneath are feasible or appropriate given the mission. So if it's a situation where there is no federal data on something, or the federal data, to Joe's question, doesn't speak to your situation, for example, you wouldn't be compelled to use federal data. Is it appropriate? Is it feasible? Is it depending on the school's mission or the programs that they offer? There may be qualitative measures, there may be quantitative measures, there may be different measures for different schools. So it does that appropriate and feasible is not getting to, you disagree with our regulations, or you disagree with us regulating in this area. It means, are these elements below applicable, relevant, feasible, appropriate for the myriad kinds of institutions that an accrediting agency is looking at and trying to ensure rigor about? So that's what we're getting at there.
So I just think this is my broader comment, which is I think there's just a lot of vague language that continues to be in some of these red lines, whether it's sort of Jamie pointed out the multiple times that the word effectively is included in here, or this phrase, and I obviously am not an agency, so it doesn't directly affect me, but I don't know how an agency would be able to feel confident that they are in compliance with these requirements when it just feels like there's some really vague terms that are being used to describe how an agency could or couldn't interpret these. And here's an example where the agency might feel like something isn't feasible or appropriate, but the department might have a different perspective on it. And I just feel like there's a risk in having language that's not more precise in terms of what the expectations are. That's sort of my general comment.
I'll let Herman speak to, he and Jamie were having a dialogue a little while ago where they were both nodding their heads about what agencies already do. So I think, Herman, if you want to answer that part of the question in terms of the vagueness.
Yeah, and I think the whole thing to remember in an application for recognition, it's not like a one-stop bam and you're found non-compliant. An agency submits the application, there's the draft, there are analysts conducting observations, there's discussion, and a lot of those, if there's any room for misinterpretation, those things are identified. An agency gets a chance to to state its case. So again, I I just want to say it's not like a one-stop thing. Now you're non-compliant. This is a total dialogue that lasts over, as it is now, over a couple of years in the review process before we come to, some sort of final conclusion.
Yeah, I understand. I know this isn't the first time you've said that to me, Herman, so I understand being an outsider to that particular process. I am appreciative for more insight into how it goes, but I would just say, and this is my own neuroses, maybe that I'm imparting onto this, like I would be terrified if I lived in my day-to-day job, unsure if I was in compliance with expectations for my organization. That feels like a really scary place to live. So I would just beg the department to be clear with institutions or agencies or whomever about what your expectations are on them, instead of saying, well, when we get to the part where we grade the exam, if you did it wrong, then we'll tell you then, and you can tell us why you didn't think you did it wrong. Like, nobody wants to live in that space. We'd rather just do it right to start with. So I think there is benefit to having language that's clear to all stakeholders about what the department's expectations are.
Yeah, I would just add one thing, not only under student achievement. Now we're being a little more descriptive here under student achievement of things that we want to see. But when you look at all of the standards language, we don't prescribe any of the content of those standards, because the statute doesn't say, we say you have to have standards for curriculum, you have to have standards for faculty. We have to then look at what the agency provides in those areas. We don't go into great detail of what is acceptable in any of those areas, because we're not, we're really not allowed to, we don't do that. Here in student achievement, again, we're not saying what the standards have to be. We're not saying what the content of them are supposed to be. We're just kind of putting some parameters around what we want to do. We do want to see some minimal expectations, and then the agency or the institution, or however the agency's standards, procedures allow, there has to be an explanation of rigor and the effectiveness of those student achievement standards.
Yes, and that's exactly my point. Like, what your definition of effective and my definition of effective as an agency might be totally different. So that is exactly what my point is. I feel like there's a lot of superlatives and vague words in here that and I won't say it anymore, but I'll be done. I just feel like everybody would benefit from more precise language. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Jamie, is your comment relatively quick? I received several indications that a number of negotiators need a break. So do you want to give it now, or you want to do it after a break? You want to do a break?
Feel free. Did you want to, were we going to go to State Off at 3 o'clock?
Greg?
I believe that's still our intention, but during this break, I will confirm.
Okay.
Yeah, he'll confirm that, and Jamie, in any event, we'll get to your question. Okay,
Yeah,
and then go to State Off.
If we pick up tomorrow, that's okay.
We will be picking up for sure tomorrow. So let's take a break till 3 o'clock. And then Greg, you can give us an update of where we're gonna go to State Off or continue on with something else like this. Okay?
All
right.
Thank you very much.
Okay, welcome back from that short break. Greg, I'll turn it back over to you for directions of your next steps.
Okay, thanks, Cindy. Yeah, so we had indicated earlier today that it was our intention to come back with some language regarding thresholds for state authorization. We're still working on that at this moment. So we have my colleague David, along with Denise, and are working on that as we speak. So what we're going to do is continue with the discussion of accreditation, and then we'll let you know when we're going to break to have a discussion on state auth.
Okay.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. So with that, Jamie, let's pick back up with you. You're on mute, Jamie.
I don't want to use more than my fair share. Is there anybody else who wants to speak at this point? Okay, I'm not the facilitator. When we envision how we would do this, and I'm very sympathetic to more to helping institutions focus on student achievement, to using available qualitative and quantitative measures for that. I think there's a lot of good that's taking place. In fact, my organization just this week is adding to our website the IPEDS information that includes field of study and debt to earnings by field of study and debt to earnings measures. And we plan to incorporate those in conversations with institutions. The problems are, as Jillian said, in the expectation of what target we're supposed to meet. And I think that the NACICI discussions that have been taking place with accreditors have been very thoughtful and useful in this direction. What do you look at? How do you use it? What consequences are there? How do you measure, how are you thinking about what's satisfactory or not? And I think that is generating some really good progress. The challenge here is to think about how to do this without these regulations stymieing or complicating a movement that is taking place and is being pressed by the department and pressed by accreditors. How do we do this where institutions have very different programs? A programmatic accreditor is in a position to think about standards for a particular program. An institutional accreditor is looking at the capacity of the institution to run all of its component parts and not the outcomes for each of its. I know there are institutions that have 30 and 40 programmatic accreditors, not to substitute for that. How does this take into account the difference between institutional and programmatic accreditors? Institutional accreditors, the one thing we know for sure is it doesn't tell you very much to look at the graduation rate for a large and complex institution. And looking at the debt to earnings ratio is going to be very different for the dental school, the business school, and the arts and theater program.
You have 30 seconds remaining.
And what we need to know is that the institution has the ability to make those kinds of judgments. So the question I would ask you is, can you help us? We're focusing on the ones that might be amenable to some part of quantitative measures. How about curriculum, faculty, student support, and facilities? Is the department anticipating that these rules would change what accreditors and therefore institutions need to do about standards in those regards?
No, and I think if I didn't mention earlier, Jamie, the minimum expectations, requirements, and those things, we just limited that to student achievement. That doesn't migrate down into curriculum, faculty, facilities, equipment, and supplies. with those other, in those other areas. So that's something that is not a requirement for those particular areas.
But doesn't the clear and effective expectations language cover
Right,
them?
again, yeah, no, not we've taken out
right.
that minimum, that clear. Now, the first part where it sets forth clear and effective expectations, that's something that's been there previously. It's not a totally new statement. I think it said before, we just said clear expectations. Here we're saying we're adding the word, we're adding the word effective. I get the point where effective can be, it's something that has to be evaluated.
Right. We assume that if you're adding a word, we assume that if the department is adding a word, it has some meaning, and that we would need to give it meaning in what we did, and that it's a change from something not sufficient.
Yeah, I think we have seen those in those rare and drastic cases where an agency has not been very effective in applying its standards, and that could be based on a number of things. It could be based on a set or large number or of failing institutions or those types of things. I mean, that effective is, I think you and I you talked about it earlier, it's does the agency effectively apply its standards? Does the whole accreditation process of the self-study, the site visit report, the decisions, again, are those standards applied thoroughly to all of its institutions in those particular areas? It's a determination of how effective the agency is in applying its standards based on the drastic performance of institutions or programs.
I know to a visitor from Mars, this would sound like gibberish, but the difference between setting clear and effective expectations and the question you were asking, which is the typical one that the review process is about and that you are used to asking, is whether they were applied effectively. So there's something, right. The new part is these new ways of thinking about effective expectations that would have to be set. And there are musts in here, not just maybes. Right. There's a lot in the directionality of this that is consistent with current changes and good practice, and that I think loads of us are spending a lot of energy saying, how can we get the best from this kind of information? When we come back to 20, it's not set these and have a discussion with the institution, that we're all used to doing. They become compliance issues. And that combination of rules is a big change, even if this one allows for terms that may be unclear, but at least I'm hearing the department's intention to leave room for reasonable application, like feasible and appropriate, but there are musts. There are obligations in here that are not very clear and that are coupled with compliance requirements. And that's given the incredible variety of data available, most of which is not perfect data. If it were possible to set criteria for what's good and what's not, the department would have done it.
30 seconds remaining.
I'm done.
Okay, thank you. Scott Dolan?
And I guess it just gets back to the conversation that we've had. Joe brought it up. It's just, and I look at my constituency, just in terms of the variation in mission and type and how we go about doing this and trying to set a single standard of clear and effective that doesn't allow for nuance that's associated with the complexity across these other areas: curricula, faculty, facilities, fiscal, student support services. And I asked this question earlier around, how do we apply this to curricula, given the fact that disciplines vary greatly, expectations vary by state, licensing boards, and there's just, I understand, to Jamie's point, I also understand the intent, and I think there's work moving in this direction. I just don't think it's always as simple as we try to make it out to be, and setting that type of language forward, along with the enforcement stuff, could create more complexity rather than trying to simplify where we should be focusing, which I think we all agreed on, which is around outcomes and how those different inputs might help support those outcomes. So I think it's maybe getting back to the table and who gets to define effective and what does effective mean given the variation in institutional type missions and students that we serve. So
Thank you, Scott. Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands on this section. Herman, you want to move to the next? I will say, Herman, can I just say that to our the people who have signed up for the public comment and you were assigned a slot or on the waiting list, we're about 15 minutes out from starting that. So please log into the waiting room utilizing the name that you registered under about 15 minutes prior to your slotted time. So back to you, Herman.
Thanks. All right, and before we leave here, I'm trying to look, and I know too in the statute that the term effectively is used in several places there. I'm going to try to look through there as we go through and kind of point those out. But I kind of hope I did kind of try to explain what we mean when we're looking when we use that term effective. But we can move down to. And I think we covered the last. If we go to page 16, Vanessa, I just want to make sure that we covered 2 is highlighted on page 16. So I didn't want to skip over that.
Laura, you have your hand up.
Yeah. So I have, I guess, 2 comments. So. We heard a lot of conversation about 60216, and I heard really no appetite, no willingness from the department to take any of the conversation into consideration. Is that accurate? Is that an accurate statement? Or is there some consideration of the conversation that we just had?
I'm going to say now, I think what we have here is a representation of the different comments that we got from committee members. I know we're gonna go back and we're gonna look at that definition of that was in the of executives, but I mean we're hearing the conversations. We'll have further discussion, but this is the last session. I think as Scott pointed out to earlier, what we have here kind of reflects what we've heard from everyone. So, not saying that we wouldn't go back and make some additional changes, but we think we're about there.
Okay, I mean, I don't feel like we're about there. There were a lot of things that were kind of dropped on us in this very last session that were not, hints of it in the previous 2 sessions. So I don't feel like we're about there at all. So I guess it is an accurate statement then that the department's doesn't have an appetite to take the conversation that we just had into consideration in the changes.
I think we're always open to go back and have further discussion. I don't know, based on those discussions, what other additional changes that we would make. But at the end of the day, we would definitely discuss the conversation today. But that's all that I can that I could probably promise and say.
Okay. So
Laura, I'd just like to point out that accreditation is on the agenda for tomorrow. There will be a revised agenda because obviously some things got pushed to Thursday that weren't initially there, but that it is accreditation is still on the agenda for tomorrow. So today is not the final opportunity for the negotiators to discuss and consider.
Sure, and we still have 50 pages to get through, so I understand. Right. So second comment then to number 2 that we just paused on. Why does it apply only to distance education? It seems like a very accusatory kind of statement to put in there about manipulating data or something. Why would a online institution be manipulating data any more than any other institution? It's just kind of an odd thing to call out.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Scott Dolan?
Well, I probably could put my hand down and wait for an answer to that question, because that was sort of my question too. I mean, manipulation shouldn't be tolerated, period, across the board, regardless. I mean, I think, does that need to be called out in regulation? Why specifically to distance ed relative to any other institution or modality?
Yeah, so I think, I think here, I think here under distance, I'm trying to remember our main intent here. I mean, and you're right, this will be applicable in any situation to ensure that that standards of performance are not inflated. I get that it's under 2 here under distance education. But I think in general, we probably meant this as a general statement about all about any situation. So I probably need to take a look at this one. Donna, did you recall you have any comments on this one?
There are specific issues with distance relating to technological monitoring that we are concerned about, but we'll take a look and see if this might be placed someplace else.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm still at the table, but could we define technological monitoring?
What I'm talking about is in distance, the issue as to making sure students are actually participating, making sure that those are that's monitored, making sure there's substantive interaction. Those have specific technological issues in distance, and that may be why this is here. Yeah. But again, we'll take a look at it.
Yeah, I'm certainly aware of student identity verification requirements, but here it's specifically around performance to the standards, which seems to be applying across all of this. So I would be really helpful to have a bit more clarity.
We'll take a look.
Good point there. You did have a good point there. So.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Jamie?
This one may be a bit of a Rorschach test. I read it completely differently, thinking that it was A in the wrong place. And I thought about the students who had spoken in public comment about the NCLEX exam and thought that that's what you had in mind here. And I was then going to say that as I read it, there's a spectrum of behaviors, and at one very important end, and the major activity is doing a whole lot of things to increase performance, which would have the effect of helping an institution meet standards. For example, people who don't know the material have to repeat the class, or they have to get tutoring or go to the writing center, or all sorts of other completely valid, desirable, worthy academic efforts to help meet the standards. And it should be written in a way that doesn't sound like that is inflating. So let's put it in the right place, be clear about what it's meant to get at. And if it's technology, and if that means pretending that somebody's in the class and they take the exam to show that the school is doing better than it really is because they're not really a student, or is it the NCLEX effort to meet a pass rate expectation, which to me is a cautionary tale about over rigidity. So I think it would be helpful for people not to be able to be criticized for doing things for academic and student learning reasons that might look like we want to move you faster to graduation, or we want to be sure that that you meet the standards of knowing the material that's required.
Okay, let's take Barmack and then maybe move on to the next section. Barmack?
Yeah, I don't know that everybody will read this text with the Jesuitical care that Jamie typically reads every text with, but maybe adding the word inappropriately or artificially before inflating could address her concern. We certainly don't object to institutions striving to improve outcomes. It's when they cheat students, as they have. By the way, the reason I use 10-year-old examples is I don't want to get sued. We are very aware of really questionable practices going on under the nose of regulators today. We get complaints from veterans all the time. We have a whole helpline that does nothing but that. And we share those with enforcement agencies as appropriate. I don't want to name anybody here. But there was a case, as you may recall, of a publicly held corporate provider where the president of the organization was literally inflating placement rates falsely. So this stuff happens, and I agree with the comments that have been made that this should not uniquely address online, that this should be a baseline expectation of all institutions.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Herman. Hey, Herman, you want to take us to the next section?
Yes, looks like, oh man, let me go up.
Herman, before you start, I think they're ready to come back from state off. So
they're ready to come back from state off?
Yeah,
Okay.
this might be a good place to break. David wanted a few minutes to come back, so I think he's coming back as we speak. So when I just heard that presently. So
Yeah, I'm here actually, Greg.
oh, thanks, Dave.
Yeah, no problem. So I can be quick because I don't have much news yet, unfortunately. The department is still working through its analysis on the data. We will come back tomorrow morning, first thing, with both a threshold, an explanation of the analysis that we've done, the proposed threshold, I should say, and an explanation of the analysis that we've done and our reasoning for use of that threshold versus others. But for now, I think we can go back to Herman to do one more walkthrough.
Okay, actually, we have about a minute and a half before public comment starts. And we need to start that on time. So perhaps this is just a good place to break and begin the public comment rather than getting through the overview and then stopping. Is that okay?
I think that's good.
Okay. Okay, so with that, perhaps we can go ahead and get started with our public comment. So,
all right. All right, Cindy, I did admit our first speaker. That is Mac Adkins from International Distance Education Certification Center. and Mac is in the room.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mac. Can you hear us? You are on mute, Mac. Should be bottom left-hand corner, maybe?
There we go. How about that?
All right. Well, good afternoon and welcome. You will have 3 minutes to address the committee, and you will receive a 30-second notice when your time's about to expire. So with that, you can go ahead and begin.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Dr. Mac Adkins, representing the International Distance Education Certification Center. I'm commenting to provide insights on the proposed rule changes outlined in issue paper 3, specifically addressing the removal of the allowance for clock hour programs delivered through asynchronous online learning. I wish to emphasize the ongoing necessity for asynchronous online learning to continuing offering courses in a clock hour format alongside the credit hour format. Numerous professions, including real estate, appraisal, insurance, financial planning, accounting, home inspection, land surveying, and engineering, have specific regulatory requirements mandating a prescribed number of clock hours for certification, licensure, and continuing education. The rationale for eliminating eligibility for asynchronous online courses in a clock hour format seems to have stemmed from concerns that some programs have failed to provide the required training. This perception may have arisen from a misunderstanding that there is no acceptable methodology for quantifying instructional activities to meet the stipulated number of clock hours. I'm pleased to draw your attention to a well-established set of quantitative standards that have been successfully implemented for over 2 decades. Authored in 1998 by the International Distance Education Certification Center, these standards have undergone regular reviews and updates. They've been employed to assess thousands of online asynchronous courses from hundreds of online education providers. These standards, which are available at idecc.org, detail how instructional activities, including word count, external links, interactive exercises, video and audio content, diagrams, and assessments are quantified. Notably, the standards require that video content may not be fast-forwarded, must be viewed in its entirety, and video content must be immediately assessed. Furthermore, these standards mandate all providers to utilize a learning management system that tracks and reports the actual amount of time learners spend in the course. This requirement resolves the perceived issue that online asynchronous clock hour courses are failing to deliver the required training by providing tangible documentation of the duration of learner engagement. IDEC proposes to make these clock hour computational standards available to higher education institutions without imposing the obligation to meet their other standards for instructional design and delivery. This collaborative approach ensures that the established standards can be seamlessly integrated, contributing to the effective and accountable delivery of asynchronous online courses in a clock hour format. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Adkins. Crystal, who do we have next?
Our next speaker is David Halperin. He's an attorney and counselor, and he is in the room.
Okay, David.
Good afternoon. I'm ready when you are.
Okay, you'll have 3 minutes with a 30-second notice just before it expires, okay? With that, go ahead and begin.
Thank you. Many students say a school's status as accredited and resulting seal of approval and aid from the department are the reason they enrolled. Because accreditors are gatekeepers for federal aid, their oversight is critical to prevent students and taxpayers from getting ripped off by poor quality overpriced schools. So it's good that the department has started to incorporate concerns about bad behaving schools in reviews of accreditors, starting with ACICS, which accredited some of the worst. But there remain problems that are not, as was said, 10-year-old examples. ACCSC has tolerated years of abuses at CEHE, Vatterott, and elsewhere. Data shows many ACCSC schools leave students worse off than when they started. SACS has permitted blatant abuses at Kaiser University. WASC has allowed misconduct at Ashford. COE at Florida Career College. The department has started to ask those accreditors questions, but under current rules, it hasn't taken firm action and predatory behavior is ongoing. The rules have done little also to address rampant abuses at schools overseen by Higher Learning Commission. HLC has long tolerated predatory conduct at Walden, DeVry, EDMC, Kaplan, Ashford, Grand Canyon, University of Phoenix, and the Perdoceo schools. Perdoceo in recent years paid $500 million to settle with 48 states and $30 million to settle with the FTC over deceptive practices. Numerous Perdoceo employees have told the department the company recruiters continue to make misleading sales pitches. As to University of Phoenix, in 2015, the Pentagon briefly banned it from recruiting based on evidence of violations. In 2019, Phoenix agreed to pay $191 million to resolve FTC charges. It ran ads falsely suggesting ties to major employers. Last year, Phoenix was again running deceptive ads, this time falsely implying it is a state school. If Phoenix tells these falsehoods in the open, imagine what its recruiters tell students one-on-one. The school's graduation rate is 14%. Many victims are low income. These schools should not be accredited. They should not get taxpayer dollars, but under current rules, the abuses continue. Last year, HLC renewed accreditations of the University of Phoenix and Perdoceo's Colorado Tech, each for a full 10 years. And the department, in turn, renewed HLC for a full 5 years. The system isn't working. Accreditors have often failed as gatekeepers of integrity and quality. The draft regulations are a start to fixing the problem. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you, David. Crystal, who's next?
Our next speaker is Joel Sadowski. He is representing himself. Joel is in the room.
Okay, good afternoon, Joel.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
Sure.
My name is Joel, and I'm a Macalester College student, and I'm also a member of the Macalester College Student Government, and I am speaking in favor of the provision banning colleges and universities from bundling the cost of textbooks and other course materials with tuition and fees. As a library student worker and student government member advocating for students in academic policy spaces, I've become familiar with how automatic textbook billing is forced upon students as the textbook industry seeks to combat sustainable and open cost-saving measures such as material sharing and the development of open educational resources. In October 2021, representatives from Macalester's library, programming, and our academic programming and financial aid departments spoke with the student government about a possible shift to an automatic textbook billing program. At the time, I really appreciated the exploration of alternative options, although I and most of the student government ended up advocating against Macalester adopting this program once we learned more about the actual impact on the cost of materials. I was proud of the college and our commitment to shared governance when we initially rejected this deal, and I thought that our school had made a bold choice to play to our strengths, which are a high adoption and creation rate of open educational resources due to institutional support and our incredible library team, and a powerful student government partnership with the library to create a highly used textbook sharing program. I later learned that this was not the end of it. On multiple of the committees I sit on due to my student government position, I learned that Barnes & Noble was giving the college essentially an ultimatum. Macalester must transition to Barnes & Noble's automatic textbook billing program, or they would leave, leaving Macalester with no cap and gown provider, campus bookstore, or merchandise provider. Despite the advocacy of me and my classmates suggesting that it was preferable to sever ties with the corporation than enter a deal that would double the cost of course materials for the median student, Macalester entered contract negotiation and is poised to start First Day Complete in the fall, with misleading communication and a semesterly fee over double what the median student spends on course materials. As tuition creep weakens access to higher education and the integrity of colleges and universities, I urge this committee to consider the role of the monopolized textbook industry in predatory practices such as automatic textbook billing, and I strongly support any attempts to restrict the power of predatory textbook vendors. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Joel. Crystal, please tell us who's next. but I want to reach out to those who are registered that please, you need to log in under the same name you registered. If we are unable to identify the name that you sign in under, we're unable to allow you into the room. So Crystal, who is next?
Yes, next we have Amina Raymond. Amina's representing herself and she's in the room.
Okay, thanks. Amina?
Hi, everyone. My name is Amina Rahman, and I am a psychology major on the pre-med track at the University of Michigan Dearborn. The purpose of my comment is to express support for the department's proposal to stop automatic textbook billing without student authorization. I serve as a senator for my school's student government, co-representing the College of Arts, Sciences, and Letters, which is one of the 4 major colleges at the university. I'm also the student government representative for my university's Open Education Committee with faculty and staff. And with the Open Education Committee, I've written an article about the difficulties of automatic textbook billing for students and given a presentation about this topic at Digital Education Days 2023, which was attended by faculty and staff across multiple universities. So the cost of books and courseware impacts many of the students on our campus. At times, I've spent hundreds of dollars a semester on textbooks, and I'm not the only one on my campus who has had to pay large amounts for courseware. I have learned through my involvement in student government and through peer engagement that students can struggle to make these purchases in addition to tuition costs. I've recruited students from student government to speak at the Michigan Academic Library Association panel, which was actually today, about the financial burdens of required courseware. So with the cost of education already being so high in many aspects, control is really important for student finances. So automatic textbook billing would add to the financial stress faced by students. A regulation to make these programs opt-in for students would center student choice. And I'm aware that students are not a monolith, and I recognize that there may be some students who support this model. However, a model that automatically charges all students may harm some students in the process. As such, altering the model to opt-in would greatly reduce student stress. Many students are financially conscious, and if these automatic textbook billing programs truly save students money, then they will opt in. So thank you to the committee for listening to my comment on how important this proposal is, because it gives students the power on how they choose to spend their money on textbooks.
Okay, thank you. Crystal, who is next?
Next, we have Savannah Lebdecker, who is representing herself. Savannah's in the room.
Hi, Savannah.
Hello.
Welcome. You will have 3 minutes to address the committee and receive a 30-second notice just before your 3 minutes expire. So with that, please feel free to begin.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Savannah Lebdecker, and I'm currently a sophomore studying political science at Florida State University. I'm commenting to express my support for the Department of Education's proposal to stop automatic textbook billing and give students the right to opt into these changes. As a student who is financially independent in college, I typically struggle with purchasing necessities on top of the exuberant textbook costs I face, especially during the beginning of the semester. This past semester, I was enrolled in automatic textbook billing and was charged over $300 without being provided the freedom to choose where to buy my books from. As a result of this cost, I had to strictly budget my expenses for the first 2 months of school, visit our campus food pantry, and inquire about possible ways of paying club dues in 2 payments, which was admittedly an uncomfortable conversation to have. Inclusive access programs add to the pressure I face as a student, as it's not always clear if I'm enrolled in a course with automatic billing. Additionally, I found that the process of opting out of this program is complex and confusing, as I've tried and eventually gave up on figuring out how to opt out. This past semester, I was shocked at the over $300 I had to put towards my class materials. In the past, I've had some expensive textbooks here and there, but nothing near $300. The difference between this cost stemmed from the Inclusive Access Program. In past years, I've bought secondhand books from upperclassmen, but Inclusive Access completely took away my ability to find the cheapest option available. Additionally, as someone who learns best through using a physical textbook, highlighting and writing notes and margins, inclusive access programs have taken away my ability to seek out physical textbooks rather than the online ones typically provided within inclusive access. I believe implementing a regulation where students have the option to opt into these programs is an amazing alternative. It would greatly simplify matters if I could decide whether to accept the fee rather than having the added stress of potentially being charged without realizing, especially considering the chaotic nature that the start of the semester has. I believe this model would increase transparency among student body and provide students with a greater choice concerning their college experience. In closing, I want to reiterate my support for the Department of Education's proposal to give students the choice over how they're billed for books and supplies. Thank you for considering my perspective.
Thank you, Savannah.
Thank you.
So who is next?
Our next speaker is Sylvia Garcia from Spokane Community College. Sylvia is in the room.
Okay, welcome, Sylvia.
Thank you.
Go ahead. No, go right ahead, Sylvia.
All right, thank you. I'm Sylvia Garcia, and I'm a faculty member from Spokane Community College in Washington State. I wish to comment on the department's proposal of removing the definition of asynchronous distance education from clock hour programs. Its impact is wide-reaching, especially with over 500 community colleges and technical colleges across the country offering some form of clock hour studies. First, I recognize the department's responsibility. It needs to be assured of a level of integrity in the delivery of distance education. However, that assurance can be done in a more refined manner than simply taking away a method. I must emphasize this doesn't just impact our schools, but most of all, it impacts our students. Having served over 30 years as the prior chair of our department, I've witnessed the evolution of the learner. Prior to the pandemic, most clock hour program training was 100% on-site, which required student learning only within the walls of the classroom. Since COVID, I've seen the emergence of new learners and newer technology. I've seen students utilize LMS platforms to continue to effectively learn, but with more flexibility in time and location. Students can still be trained on site during lab and clinic, but also go online to complete their theoretical studies. This hybrid format has allowed our students greater success. They're still learning the information, but have the flexibility to balance many other demands while training for a new career. Instead of eliminating this from the definition, I suggest the department consider other options. The department provided guidelines in 2021, and I suggest adjusting those guidelines as a more effective method. In Washington State, our regulatory agency limits the amount of distance education for specific clock hour programs. This places the focus on on-site education, but still allows for flexibility of distance education. The department may consider capping the number of clock hours. Please consider the obstacles this decision will have on hundreds of thousands of students and will move education progress backwards.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Crystal, who is next?
Our next speaker is Matthew Cardwell, who's representing himself. Matthew is in the room and looks like connecting to audio.
Okay. Oh. As a reminder to those who signed up to provide public comment, if you haven't already done so, please log in and log in under the name that you registered with. Thank you. Are you set to go, Matthew? Can you hear us? Okay, if you'd unmute yourself, you will have 3 minutes to speak and receive 30-second notice just before that 3 minute expires. So with that, go ahead, Matthew.
All right, good afternoon. Again, yes, my name is Matthew Cardwell, and I feel duty-bound to share my experience at Sonoran Desert Institute, excuse me, to help other veterans. After I got out of the Army, I first attended a community college near Dallas, Texas, but I had trouble commuting to the school and shortly withdrew. So I decided I should look at an online school. From my time in the Army, I was interested in gunsmithing, While I searched for a new school, I came across Sonoran Desert Institute, which was entirely online. After reviewing the website, it looked to me like it had a lot of students who were veterans. And at the time, it seemed like a perfect fit. So in the fall of 2015, I enrolled in their Associates of Applied Science and Firearms Technology. However, after attending, I now don't think anyone can honestly teach gunsmithing entirely online. It requires a lot of hands-on training in machine shops with large tools, which I certainly did not have. And they only provided me with some small hand tools. The instruction, unfortunately, entirely consisted of YouTube videos that I could have watched for free on my own. The only graded assignments were actually discussion posts. And then for tests, I basically had to teach myself everything, which wasn't even really a problem because all the tests were open book. The teachers, in my opinion, practically seemed non-existent. Every email I would receive from them was a no reply email. And anytime I submitted a question through their portal, I would receive automated responses. I tried contacting the school to get in touch with some of the instructors, and for most of the time I could only get in touch with their admissions offices. It seemed to me like the program was mostly low-level gun maintenance, and certainly not the kind of smithing that I would need in order to get a job once I completed the program. So after only a handful of months, I left the school. In my opinion,
You have 30 seconds remaining.
Thank you. In my opinion, I don't think any accreditor who has actually taken a class at Sonoran Desert Institute would have approved the school. Yeah, and I just hope hearing that about my experience will help the committee in its work. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Matthew. Appreciate it. Krista, who is next?
Our next speaker is Akshita Pawar, who's representing herself, and she is in the room.
Okay, thanks. Good afternoon. If you could unmute yourself. Okay.
Hello.
Hello. You'll have 3 minutes to address the committee, and you will receive a 30-second notice prior to that time expiring. So with that, please feel free to begin.
Okay. Hi, my name is Akshita Pawar, and I'm a second year undergraduate student at the University of Pittsburgh. I'm currently working to get my bachelor's degree in environmental studies and economics. After this, I'm planning to go to law school to hopefully pursue a career in environmental law. The cost of my undergraduate tuition, my current cost of living, combined with potential costs of law school, forced me to carefully consider where I put my money and avoid unnecessary costs. I also come from an immigrant family, and I only recently received authorization to work and receive federal financial aid. So for my first year of college, I was entirely on my own in terms of paying for it. Today, I wanted to voice my support for the Department of Education's proposal to stop automatic textbook billing, also known as inclusive access or equitable access models, without acquiring student consent. I understand that inclusive access can sometimes be a cheaper alternative to a brand new physical textbook, but being automatically billed for a textbook that I did not choose to purchase adds to my stresses as a student, especially when the costs of this program are not stated outright and force me to check my full tuition bill to even see how much I was paying for it. The process to opt out is also unnecessarily complicated, furthering my frustrations. This semester, for example, I was automatically enrolled in inclusive access for an economics course that I'm taking. It was briefly mentioned during our lecture, but I was not made aware of how much I was paying for it, and I wouldn't have known this unless I checked my bill for my full tuition bill, and I noticed a charge for inclusive access. When I compared the retail price of this textbook to the inclusive access price, the inclusive access was cheaper, but since I was able to find a PDF version of the textbook for free, I attempted to opt out of the inclusive access. However, because the process of opting out was not clear on the website, I searched how to do it online, and I found directions to opt out on the university's website, but they were not up to date, and the process was entirely different on the actual website for the inclusive access. It took me such a long time and forced me to jump through so many hoops until I was finally able to opt out. Being able to choose whether or not I wanted to opt in the first place would have saved me a lot of trouble and a lot of time. I think a regulation to make these programs opt-in for students is a great idea. It would be a lot easier if it were my choice to accept a charge, rather than having to worry about getting billed without my consent, on top of everything else I have to worry about as a student. I also think it's important to remember that students come from all different backgrounds and circumstances, and you can probably find a lot of students who love this model. But the reality for many students is that we just don't have extra money to help pad the publishing industry's profits. Thank you for your time and letting me share my support for this proposal that will give students a say on how they're billed for books and supplies.
Thank you. Crystal, who is next?
Next, we have Caitlin Cadell, who's representing herself, and Caitlin is in the room.
Okay, Caitlin, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay, Caitlin, you'll have 3 minutes to address the committee and receive a 30-second notice prior to that expiration of 3 minutes. With that, please begin.
All right. Good afternoon. My name is Caitlin Cadell, and I'm a Marine Corps veteran. I'd like to take a few minutes today to talk about my time at the Art Institutes of Pittsburgh. In 2014, I was a single mother with a desire to advance my career in a creative field. The Art Institute seemed like a good option since the classes were online, so it accommodated my hectic schedule. The school was eager to sign me up, and in retrospect, this was a red flag. The education was not good. Whenever I struggled, the teachers were no help. Instead, I had to turn to my fellow classmates. The material we learned was limited. The school only taught us how to use Adobe, which was really expensive and harder to access once we left school. I wish we had learned more programs and developed a more versatile skill set, but because I didn't have a lot to compare it to, I thought this was all normal and just how school worked. During a particularly difficult period in my life in late 2018 to early 2019, I had to pause my studies. Afterwards, I went to start classes again, only to find the school had closed. I had been given no warning and was completely blindsided. For a brief time, their website showed my credits would transfer to a handful of other schools, but my local community college told me I would have to start from the beginning, that my credits wouldn't transfer. The whole experience was very frustrating, especially because I used up my GI Bill benefits and cannot get them back. I earned those benefits and now I have nothing. With raising 5 kids and trying to pay the bills, school is just not an option for me at this time, but it's also really hard to do anything without a degree. This kind of behavior needs to be stopped before students get hurt because there just aren't remedies that can make up for everything we experienced. I feel it was unfair that I was given no warning about the school's closure and was left with limited options afterwards. Please consider rules that will protect people like me from abrupt school closings. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Caitlin. Krista, who's next?
Our next speaker is Amy Hatfield from Columbus State Community College, and Amy is in the room.
Okay. Good afternoon, Amy.
Hello, my name is Amy Hatfield, and I have been a professor of mathematics at Columbus State Community College in Columbus, Ohio for the past 20 years. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak before you today regarding the positive impact inclusive access has had on the students I teach. Columbus State is an open access 2-year institution with an average enrollment of 25,000 students per year, serving 5 separate counties in Ohio. In addition to offering the first 2 years of a bachelor's degree through transfer partnerships with 4-year institutions, Columbus State also offers over 200 applied associate degree and certificate programs, supporting workforce development in our communities and providing an affordable, high-quality post-secondary education is at the heart of our mission as a community college. Our student demographics at Columbus State are diverse. 20% of our students are Black or African American, 25% are over the age of 24, and 75% are enrolled part-time. Many of our students are working adults and adults with children. Over 1/3 of our students depend on financial aid to pay their institution and purchase their material costs. These students are making an investment in their future and the future of our communities. For many students, this investment for a better future requires significant financial sacrifice in the present. And as their teacher, I am duty-bound to be a responsible steward of their investment and their sacrifice. That is why I choose inclusive access for the homework software system I use in my math courses. My students pay only $70 per semester for this software with inclusive access, where before they paid $130 per semester. And that's a 46% reduction in cost while still providing the quality software my students need. Software that is proven to increase course success rates and close equity gaps. And on the issue of equity, assuring that our financial aid recipients have access to their course materials on day one, just as other students have, is a significant equity concern. Students who cannot purchase their materials before classes begin because of a delay with financial aid have already fallen behind before they can begin through no fault of their own. And such students are far more likely to withdraw or fail the course and then suffer financial aid consequences. Inclusive access removes this barrier for my students and has become a very important part of how I support their success. The revised language the department is proposing will eliminate the ability
You have 30 seconds remaining.
to ensure my students have access to the required software they need on the first day at the lowest cost. I urge the department to reconsider their decision to eliminate these programs, which have shown so many benefits for so many students. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Appreciate that. We're gonna squeeze in one more, if that's okay.
Okay.
Not seeing any objections. Crystal, give us one more person, please.
Okay. So then our final speaker for today will be Kelly Del Pino from Pearson Campus Ambassador, the University of Pittsburgh. Kelly should be in the room.
Hey, Kelly, are you with us?
Hello, yes.
Okay. So Kelly, you have 3 minutes with a 30-second notice prior to that time expiring. So please begin.
Hello, I'm Kelly Alpino. I'm a junior at the University of Pittsburgh, studying psychology and communications. I value transparency, so you should know that I am also a Pearson Campus Ambassador, which means that I work directly with my fellow students to collect feedback through focus groups, surveys, and individual interviews. I hear from my fellow students what they think about course material programs like Rebel and My Lab at the University of Pittsburgh, and relay that back to publishers like Pearson, so publishers like Pearson can continually improve the programs. This is how I know that the proposed strike to the cash management rules that supports access and affordability programs will negatively impact students across the country, and especially at my campus, which has had an access and affordability program since at least 2016 and saves students 50 to 70% on course materials. These programs, often called inclusive access, allow universities to acquire course materials for an entire class of students with a single order, ensuring that students get the materials on the first day of class. These programs also allow students to pay for the materials using Title IV financial aid, grants, and loans, rather than going out of pocket to get the course materials they need. I personally appreciate not having to find outside sources of funding to get access to the highest quality materials. Now, incidentally, the current rule established under the Obama-Biden administration required that publishers offer the course materials included in these programs at below current market rates. And as a result, inclusive access programs have made a really dramatic contribution to affordability as well. In fact, the independent research group Student Monitor reports that these programs fueled a decline of 41% in spending in the category over the past decade. And the other group that looks at this, Student Watch, found a 57% decline in spending, also in large part because of these programs. The College Board's most recent report on college pricing notes that students now spend an average of $310 a year in the category, making it a very rare bright spot in higher ed affordability. As a college student, I value the quality of the online learning solutions that are available through these programs and appreciate the role they have played in driving significant progress in affordability. The proposed rule changes will end the right of colleges and universities to provide these programs that have resulted in a decade-long decline in students' spending on course materials and dramatically improved student outcomes. I support greater transparency, and I think that students should be able to know more about how the progress around these programs works. So a rule change regarding greater transparency would make sense. But the fact is that these programs have truly delivered on the promise of affordability. They must be protected and preserved. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. So with that, we are have concluded the public comment time for today and the session of day 3, session 3. So we will see you all in the morning, where we will anticipate starting off with state authorization. first thing in the morning and then moving to accreditation. So with that, have a good night.